help them survive the pandemic. Prime Minister Pierre knows the facts, yet he chose to lie to the nation. Why? To mislead and divide. St. Lucia deserves a leader who values integrity, one who speaks the truth, not one who tries to twist it. Pierre, Pabo, we need real leadership, not deception. Youth and Sports Minister Casimir has been caught blatantly lying about the delays with several disciplines related to national school sports. On October 23, 2024, an article published by Terry Finisterre, a well-known sports journalist and a close political ally of Minister Casimir, penned an article titled "School Sports Suspended." The story went on to explain that secondary student athletes in St. Lucia would be denied an opportunity to showcase their talents and abilities this term, as school sports has been suspended. It went further to say that this term faced the unusual interruption due to the Julian Alfred homecoming in September. According to Finisterre, one official who wished to remain anonymous told him that the disruption in instruction occasioned by the week of activities, including school rallies and a holiday, in addition to the resources that went into planning the festivities, were all a factor in deciding to cull sports. It is therefore disingenuous and a blatant lie on the part of Minister Casimir to accuse the UWP of fabricating this issue when it was first brought to light by his close friend and colleague. Attempts to salvage the issue were only made due to significant public pressure over the last 2 weeks. Our young athletes deserve leaders who will prioritize their development, not make excuses. It's time for transparency, accountability, and truth. St. Lucia deserves a government that values youth empowerment, not one that sidelines it. Kenson Pabo.
Are you ready to make a difference? Join the movement that aims to make St. Lucia the best place to live, work, visit, and invest. The United Workers' Party is a team of forward thinkers, visionaries, passionate and caring citizens just like you. Together, we can create a brighter future, create safer communities, lower taxes, improve healthcare, and create more opportunities for all. Stand with the UWP and be part of change. Join the United Workers' Party because St. Lucia deserves better.
Youth and Sports Minister Casimir is under fire now that it has been revealed that he has acquired millions worth of real estate over the last 3.5 years. Since assuming office, Casimir has developed 3 villas in Union Hilltop. He is now in the process of constructing another development in Cap Estate, this time with 5 properties. What makes this transaction suspicious is that Casimir made a $100,000 cash deposit on the property. The total cost of the property is about $273,000. Compounding the situation is that a contractor, who is also a political financier of Casimir, is the one developing the minister's newly acquired Cap Estate property. This same contractor was awarded a multi-million-dollar contract for rehabilitation work done on the Darren Sammy cricket ground in preparation for World Cup cricket, as well as numerous other contracts in the constituency of Grosley. The allegations being leveled against the minister is that he has received kickbacks from the contractor for the Cap Estate development in return for the awarding of multi-million-dollar contracts around the constituency. Has Casimir filed these developments with the Integrity Commission? Prime Minister Philippe Pierre claimed that he would have a zero tolerance for corruption in his cabinet, although he has ignored numerous glaring examples of corruption amongst his cabinet colleagues. Will this be another situation that Philippe Pierre blindly ignores? St. Lucians deserve answers. Kingson and Philippe Pierre, Pabo.
The United Workers' Party reaffirms its unwavering commitment to the health and well-being of every St. Lucian. When re-elected, we will reinstate the National Health Insurance NHI program, a vital initiative that was regrettably abandoned by the St. Lucia Labour Party, the SLP. This decision by the SLP has left thousands of St. Lucians vulnerable with limited access to affordable quality health care. The United Workers' Party will correct this injustice because we believe that health care is not a privilege, it is a fundamental human right that every citizen is entitled to. The National Health Insurance Program was designed to create a comprehensive, inclusive, and sustainable healthcare system that ensures no one is left behind or left out. And that is regardless of economic status. Under the leadership of the United Workers' Party, the NHI will be reinstated to provide the following benefits to St. Lucians. 1. Comprehensive health coverage. Every St. Lucian will have access to essential healthcare services, which includes doctor consultations, hospitalization, specialist care, diagnostic tests, maternity services, prescription medication, and emergency medical attention. No one will be denied care because of their inability to pay. Secondly, we'll reduce the financial burden. Too many families and individuals face the impossible choice between seeking medical care and meeting basic living expenses. The NHI will significantly reduce out-of-pocket expenses, making healthcare more affordable for all, especially for vulnerable groups like the elderly, children, low-income families, and single parents. 3. Timely and efficient medical attention. Long wait times and delayed treatments often result in worsened health outcomes. With the NHI, patients will receive timely care, preventing complications and reducing the strain on our already burdened healthcare system. Number 4, it will focus on preventative care. Preventative health care reduces long-term costs and improves quality of life. The NHI will cover preventative services such as routine checkups, screenings, immunizations, and health education programs to promote healthier lifestyles and reduce the prevalence of chronic lifestyle diseases. Number 5, strengthening the healthcare system. The NHI will provide the financial stability needed to upgrade medical facilities, invest in modern equipment, and improve the working conditions of healthcare professionals. This will enhance the overall quality of healthcare services across the island. And 6, peace of mind for all St. Lucians. Knowing that quality healthcare is always within reach and accessible provides a sense of security. Families will no longer live in fear of medical emergencies they cannot afford, and every child will have the opportunity to grow up healthy and strong. With the United Workers' Party, St. Lucians will certainly have a healthier future. The United Workers' Party has a proven track record of investing in St. Lucia's health sector, from improving hospital infrastructure to increasing the availability of medical resources. Our vision for St. Lucia includes a robust healthcare system where no citizen is left to suffer due to lack of accessibility or affordability. The abandonment of the NHI by the SLP was a betrayal of the people's trust, but under the United Workers' Party, we will restore this critical program because we believe in a St. Lucia where healthcare is accessible, affordable, and reliable for every citizen. When you vote for the United Workers' Party, you are voting for a healthier, stronger, and more secure St. Lucia. Your health is our priority, and we will deliver. A United Workers' Party government plans to change this situation. This crisis demands more than just words. It requires leadership action and solutions. As a government, we will take decisive steps to restore law and order, provide opportunities for our people, and take our communities back from crime and violence. We will do the following. 1. Empowering our youth with after-school and weekend programs. We will introduce holistic after-school and weekend programs that keep our youth engaged in sports, music, technology, and vocational training, providing positive alternatives to crime and idleness. Number 2, creating more economic opportunities. Many of our young men turn to crime due to lack of employment, and so we will work to ensure that we provide support to small businesses, create more entrepreneurial opportunities, and provide them with training programs to help individuals become more self-sufficient. 3, we will improve access to affordable housing. We believe that poor living conditions contribute to crime, and we will upgrade and develop affordable housing to provide solutions so that families can live in safer, more stable environments. 4, we will use technology to fight crime. We will invest in CCTV surveillance networks, smart street lighting, and crime detecting technology to help deter and solve crimes more efficiently. 5, revitalizing sports and community development. We will introduce and upgrade sports facilities across the island and organize regular sporting competitions to keep our young men engaged in structured activities instead of turning to crime. And I say this given the fact that the opportunity for this to take place has been eroded by the squandering of the funds that should be used for youth and sporting activities from the National Lottery after guaranteeing a loan of $80 million and having the National Lottery to finance that loan with $80,000 monthly, leaving absolutely no resources to provide for those programs for young people. We will introduce youth rehabilitation and second chance programs. We will introduce rehabilitation programs for at-risk youth and for first-time. Good morning and welcome to another of our weekly press briefing hosted by the United Workers' Party. And we wish to welcome everyone who is joining us on live stream throughout the length and breadth of St. Lucia, and especially those of you who religiously follow our press briefing from the diaspora. We are happy to know that you continue to demonstrate great interest in what is taking place in your homeland, St. Lucia. And never mind the crises that we are facing, we know that we have your loyalty and commitment to this country. This morning at our press briefing, we have with us 3 of our candidates. We have the Deputy Political Leader, Guy Joseph. We have the endorsed candidate for Castries Central, Mr. Rush Clark. And we have the endorsed candidate for Castries South, Mr. Tommy Descat. And between them, they will be tackling the subjects of high cost of living and crime. Of course, we know that St. Lucia has been reeling under, a barrage of murders that have taken place in the last week and a half. Perhaps a dozen or so people have perished, including a pregnant lady who was 7 months pregnant, who was gunned down, and in the process, not only did she lose her life, but lost her 7-month-old baby. I just want to remind you that one of our presenters here this morning is actually the cousin to this young lady, and he will be speaking to us on the spate of crime that is taking place in this country and the surge in homicides that continues year after year, even after we have had a record-breaking year last year. And of course, he is in a position to speak on the subject because it is one that has hit very close to home for him. And so, we express our sincere condolences, and we reach out to Rush and his family with our support, and we lift them in prayers as we pray that they find the courage to deal with yet another blow to their family as a result of violent crime in this country. We are here to speak on the issues. Of course, the only St. Lucians who are not aware of the crime issue and its impact on the people of St. Lucia is the government of St. Lucia. So we do not expect to hear from them on the issue. So I would like to call on our first presenter, who will in fact be the endorsed candidate for Castries Central, Mr. Rush Clark, and he will be addressing the subject of crime in St. Lucia.
Good morning to the press, to the people of Castries Central, and to all St. Lucians listening. I stand before you not just as the candidate, not just as a citizen, but as a man in grief, grieving for the soul of this country and for the lives we have lost. The Helen of the West is bleeding, not just from the gunshots echoed throughout our communities, but from the womb of our nation itself. We are miscarrying our future, burying sons before they become men. And worst of all, we are starting to normalize it. Let me paint the picture of what the last 2 weeks have looked like in St. Lucia. Friday, June 27th, a 36-year-old Jemmy Charles of Richford Dennery was shot and killed. 15 minutes later, police responded to another shooting in Grosile. Daniel Charles, 27 years old, gunned down in Moshi. Sunday, June 29th, Anthony Cox, an 18-year-old, killed in Palmis Soufre. Monday, June 30th, Yannick Jean-Philippe, a young man, fresh out of Bocage Secondary School, shot multiple times in New Village. Fast forward to just last week. Tuesday, July 1st, 3 persons were shot. 1 died. Kennedy Leon of Grand Riviere, Dennery. Thursday, July 3rd, 4 persons were shot. 2 dead. One was a 33-year-old Ika Jean-Baptiste, a carpenter by trade, caught in a hail of bullets while preparing for his daughter's graduation. And the other was my cousin, Troya St. Martin. She was 32 years old, 7 months pregnant, caught in the crossfire. Imagine getting a call at 9:30 p.m. about another shooting, but this time, it's your family. You rush to the hospital. You see doctors scrambling with the bare minimum requirements and resources, fighting to save 2 lives, a mother and her unborn child. She had no bullet exit wounds, but her life was critically slipping away. They opened her up, trying to save the baby. But my cousin died on that operating table. And so did her baby. 2 lives gone, just like that. And the most unsettling part was witnessing how they were both zipped up in 2 separate adult-sized body bags. No special accommodations for the innocent in this country. One size fits all, even in death. Should we even ask if she was in the wrong place at the wrong time? Or should we finally admit that this country is on the wrong path and dragging us all down with it? If you walk right now through places like Wilton's Yard, Lakudu, Foligwa, you would quickly notice the neglect, the lack of representation when it comes to their housing concerns. These communities are packed with dilapidated wooden houses, structures so fragile that they offer no protection from the rain of bullets. We have reached a terrifying low. We have become a place where even stray bullets don't miss, where not even the unborn are spared, where not even the bystanders are safe, not the young, not the elderly, and not the working man. We are living in fear and dying in silence. As a Calypsonian once said, nobody sees, nobody hears, nobody speaks, and nobody cares. Well, it's time we speak, and it's time we care. Because here's the truth. Crime does not discriminate. People do. Crime doesn't ask who you worship. Crime doesn't ask where you live. Crime doesn't care if you are rich or poor. And crime definitely doesn't care who you're voting for. Bullets do not watch faces. All they do is neutralize. And when gun violence is allowed to thrive, we all bleed. But to add insult to injury, in the midst of all of this, a misrepresentative chooses to slander and ridicule those we have lost, making a mockery of those whose sole duty is our protection. The government wants to convince you that crime is down. They want to drown us in the statistics. They say from January to June this year, there were 38 homicides. That's a 30% decrease from the 40 recorded in the same period last year. Well, let me remind you, and let this be on record. Under this administration, in 2024, St. Lucia recorded the highest number of homicides in our country's history. 77 lives gone in 12 months. Walk for progress. This is the reality under this administration. This is their legacy. 77 lives on record. This government had every opportunity to act. They created a position called the Minister of Crime Prevention. The Prime Minister, self-appointed as the Minister of National Security. And they embraced a man that even the United States Embassy highlights as a crime minister. A man who somehow knows more as to what happens under the table and behind closed doors than even our own very Royal St. Lucia Police Force. So, Mr. Crime Minister, since you claim to know so much, please tell us. Tell us, who are the culprits? Who are the drug barons? Who is controlling the guns and pulling the strings? Who is the Escobar? Who is the Capone? And who is the El Chapo of St. Lucia? Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to quote, "You know what I know, and I know what you know." So, Minister, when you remain in silence, we are left to wonder, what is your true agenda? Is it to protect us? Or is it to control, manipulate, and orchestrate the chaos? My people of St. Lucia, let me make this crystal clear. We are not asking this government for too much. All we are asking for is protection. The protection that we pay for. In just 2 weeks, 12 murders. And at this stage, the government bears the responsibility of our public safety. But when those who are supposed to demand protection are instead endorsing violence, then God help us all. Even Dr. Kenny Anthony once admitted, we have all failed in the fight against crime. But you know what is worse than failure? Refusing to act. And as long as the story of impacts remains unresolved, and as long as the actions of Operation Restore Confidence remains buried, as long as rogue police officers, crooked politicians, and dirty businessmen remain untouched, crime will not stop. It will only get worse. St. Lucia, my name is Rosh Clark, and I am the United Workers candidate for Castries Central. I will not stay silent while our people bleed. We deserve better. Better than silence when mothers grieve. Better than the cold numbers masking real pain. Better than leaders who turn away when our nation cries. We deserve a future where our children are safe. Streets are filled with hope and not fear. We deserve justice that is fair, swift, and unwavering. We deserve leaders who stand with us and not above us. And as I say this to every St. Lucian, especially to the people of Castries Central, if a government cannot protect our lives, then it has no right to govern our future. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, this was the United Workers' Party endorsed candidate for Castries Central, Mr. Rosh Clark, who addressed you on the issue of crime in St. Lucia. You know, those of us who survived the crime do have a tough life living in St. Lucia. What the gunmen do not do to us, cost of living is doing. And so we find ourselves having to juggle on a daily basis, making hard decisions. When we find ourselves deciding between medication and food, which one to prioritize. When we're at the supermarket, prioritizing what it is we can afford to take among the things that we need, our lives are becoming impossible in this country. So, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to call on the next presenter who will speak on the subject of cost of living, high inflation. Of course, unlike the Prime Minister who says that it is imported, inflation is imported, we know it was compounded by the actions and policies of our government. And let us not forget the imposition of the 2.5% compounded levy that was placed on us. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the endorsed candidate for Castries South, Mr. Tommy Descat, who will speak on the subject of cost of living.
Thank you very much, Spider, for the introductions. This morning I will be speaking, as Spider have indicated, on the issue of cost of living in St. Lucia. And before I enter into the substantive discussion, or my presentation rather, just to let the St. Lucians know that this is not just a cost of living crisis, but it's a leadership failure that we're dealing with here in St. Lucia. After 4 years in office, 4 years marked by rising food and fuel prices that erode real incomes of average St. Lucians, but more importantly, the poor and vulnerable in our society and country, and a government that has repeatedly claimed to have no policy tools in its arsenal to respond to spiraling inflation. In fact, the constant refrain has been that it is imported inflation and therefore there is little that the government can do. We know now that is not that the government could not do, but rather it deliberately chose not to do. It is not just imported inflation, but policy inaction. In fact, we remember vividly when asked about inflation, the Minister of Finance repeatedly scoffed at reporters, suggesting that they were acting as if the sky was falling. No policy response was offered then except excuses. On first day in Parliament, the government, probably on the advice of some political advisor, who told them that after conducting several polls, that the ordinary St. Lucians are reeling under the pressures of high cost of living, and that their handling of the cost of living crisis in St. Lucia would come under widespread scrutiny and would be on the ballot box, on the ballot ticket in the upcoming general elections. So certainly this government has found policy creativity and ingenuity and now is proposing to reduce or to zero rate 70 food items. My response to this government and your response to this government should be too late, too little. If this government took so long to respond to the inflation crisis, one can only imagine how long it would have taken to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank God it was the UWP who was in power back then, because the SLP would have told us COVID was imported and they could do nothing about it. This late and inadequate response to the cost of living crisis reveals two things about the St. Lucia Labour Party government. Firstly, the government is indeed living in a different reality, because they have not had to go to the pumps and purchase a gallon of gasoline or diesel over the last 4 years. They have not had to go to the grocery stores and to brave the prices that you face daily. It is you, the taxpayers, who have shielded them and subsidized their living for the last 4 years. This government is out of touch and tone deaf. Secondly, it reveals a government that is clueless, careless, and incompetent. A government who, rather than deal with the bread and butter issues in St. Lucia that the public confront on a day-to-day basis, but rather this government prioritizes taxing you up front and offering you vouchers later on. Permit me to go into a bit of statistics and to give you some context. In 2024, the government generated $1.38 billion in tax revenues. And that was an 11.8% increase over 2023, the highest tax intake in the history of our country. The government also introduced a 2.5 health and security levy at a time when inflation was ravaging the average household in our country. A levy which I personally believe was not needed then and is not needed now. This levy generated $18.8 million in 2023 and $38.8 million in 2024, cumulatively amounting to $57.1 million that should have been kept in the pockets and the bank accounts of the average St. Lucian. If we turn our attention to customs service charge on imports, between 2022 and 2024, on average, the government generated $107 million from import duties on imports. And if you compare that between 2017 and 2021, the government would have generated 76.4 million. So on average, this is equivalent to $31.4 million in additional revenues generated annually. And if you cumulatively compound it over the 3 years, it is $94.2 million. So let's assume that the government took the policy position that I will keep the service charge at the pre-COVID levels of $76.4 million, and that the government would not introduce a health and security levy. That means that the average St. Lucian would have paid $151 million less in taxes between 2022 and 2024. Now, if you juxtapose that this government says it injected $70 million into the economy by giving civil servants, if you net it off, the government has taxed you more than it actually has injected into the economy. If we look at insurance premiums, the government generated $12.8 million in insurance premiums between 2022 to 2024, compared to $9.6 million compared between 2027 to 2021. This means persons are paying 2017, to 2021. This means persons are paying more for motor, health, and house insurance. The reality is the government has mismanaged the inflation crisis, and St. Lucia is now substantially a more expensive place to live and to work. On the issue of fuel prices, while I will provide a more detailed account and analysis, and some have asked me to produce data and evidence to support my claims on this, I will proffer a few views on this burning issue that is impacting the St. Lucian public. Data from the Economic and Social Review reveals that the landed cost of gasoline fell from a high of 11.7 cents in 2022 to 10.30 in 2023 to 9.62 in 2024. What is interesting is that simultaneously with this decline in landed costs, the excise tax rose from $2.12 in 2022 to $3.46 in 2023 to $4.17 in 2024. What is clear is that the government captured all of the reductions in the landed costs through higher excise tax. Now, I'm aware every government needs to run a government and it needs taxes to do so. But the government also has a responsibility to shield the poor and to ensure that pass-through of higher inflation doesn't go to the domestic economy. So if one assesses the fuel pricing policy of the OECS countries, you realize three things. Antigua, and that data is on the ECCB website, has what I describe as a fixed low pricing policy, which means that the Gaston Brown administration prioritizing lowering fuel prices, even if these have an adverse impact on his fiscal position. Now, I'm not suggesting that the government pursue policies that impacts its fiscal health. Then we turn to Grenada, Dominica, St. Kitts, and St. Vincent. And these governments implemented either a partial or a full pass-through mechanism, which reflected the fluctuations in international oil prices. And so you saw a gradual reduction in the price of fuel at the pumps. In the St. Lucia case, what we had is a high and fixed pricing policy, which in effect abandoned the fuel pricing mechanism and perverted this system and made it a revenue maximizing tool. I want St. Lucians to understand that. If Antigua could have lowered prices, if Grenada could have lowered prices, why is it the Philip JP administration could not have done the same? The long and short of it is that they saw it as an opportunity to maximize prices at the pumps. So, and I want to also suggest to you that the excise revenue intake for 2024 was $80.8 million. Another record high. Never in St. Lucian history has any government generated so much revenue from excise tax. So, what could a caring government have done? They could have at least shared the reduction in the fuel prices. They could use either a 50-50 sharing arrangement 75-25 sharing arrangement, or if the government is extremely benevolent, pass on the full reduction in prices to the consumers. So I have some basic calculations, and I will present this in more detail. But if a government decided to lower at least a 50-50 sharing, where 50% of the reduction is passed to the consumer, and the government takes 50% of that in higher taxes, in 2024, the unleaded gasoline would have been $15.46. If the government was more aggressive in its policy options and passed on 75% of the savings and kept 25%, we would have paid in the range of $14.94 at the pumps for unleaded gasoline for a gallon. And if the government was passed on the full amount, we would have paid about $14.42. Now you do the math, $16.50 relative to $14.42. The government alternatively could have removed the service charge of 6% on there entirely. These are options that was available to the government. The question is, why did the government not choose to do so? I heard in Parliament, while they spoke about the removal of VAT on construction items and on food items. I tell you, this is yet another failed and ill-conceived policy that forgoes revenue but does not achieve its targeted intent. I asked the government to tell St. Lucians how much revenue has been forgone to date on this construction stimulus package. Because I know, and the reality is, the persons benefiting from the VAT removal on construction items are seated in the Philip G. Pierce cabinet. The notion that the policy is being used to stimulate the construction sector and the tourism sector is misleading, because the tourism sector attracts incentives, and therefore to say that this policy is targeting the tourism sector, it is misleading at best and is not designed to target the tourism sector. A UWP government will design policies to stimulate the construction sector and put monies directly in the hands of the average St. Lucian. And I want to put on record and to remind St. Lucians that the singular and biggest disinflationary policy that was ever introduced in our history is the reduction of VAT from 15% to 12.5%. Can you imagine what you would be facing at the pumps or on the grocery shelves if VAT was at 15%? I now turn to the issue of the food vouchers. We found out on Thursday that a major disinflationary policy of the Labour Party is the handing out of vouchers. I have looked through the estimates of revenue of expenditure in search of a national food voucher program, but could find none. I want the government to tell the public which agency is leading on this program, how much has been allocated, and how is it disaggregated by constituency. What is the eligibility criteria for accessing food vouchers in St. Lucia? We all know it is the parliamentary rep that decides who gets food vouchers. It is not a national program. It is a political program to secure votes of the poor and powerless in our country. It is time we return dignity into social programs in our country. I heard the government chastising and threatening retailers to ensure they pass on the reduction to consumers. What this government should do is sit with stakeholders and ascertain what the price will be of these 70 items with the reduced VAT on there. Then this government would then post these prices and have these prices all over the country so persons are not burdened. You are now asking the same consumers to be able to determine which prices are lower, who's passing it on. This is a lazy and clueless administration. Make it make sense, please, Mr. Minister. This government has failed on all accounts where inflation is concerned. Food, fuel. It introduces taxes when inflation is high and introduces disinflationary policies when the economy is experiencing deflation. This is a confused government in St. Lucia's history, the most confused in St. Lucia's history. And we are the ones paying for their incompetence at the pumps and the grocery shops. In closing, I would like to remind you, St. Lucians, that a government that is clueless need not occupy nor benefit from the status of public office. To care is to share. To care is to act with urgency. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tommy Descott. And I note your final words: to care is to share, and to care is to act with urgency. The government has not shared with us the possibility of a reprieve during the times of high inflation, a high cost of living. They chose instead to extort the population and to extract from us as much cash as they could. Despite that, we have not seen the benefits. We were told that we were paying a 2.5% levy for health and security, only to find out, and was said by the very people who are directly involved in running our health system, that what we got in exchange was the worst health system that St. Lucia has ever seen in history. And I do not want to tell you about the crime. I don't want to scare you any further, but just to say that since then we have recorded record numbers of homicide in this country. Now, Mr. Descott asked the question, who are the people benefiting from the VAT removal on construction material? And he said perhaps they're in cabinet. I heard, I do not know to what extent, but I heard two of the greatest beneficiaries are Richard Frederick and his protege, Kenson Casimir. Kenson Casimir, as you all know, has become a real estate tycoon in the last 3 years. If we have a self-serving government who cares little about our lives and our livelihood, we have to take a stand and do something about it. I want to call on the Deputy Political Leader, Mr. Guy Joseph, to wrap up the two presentations, or should I say to wrap them together. He will speak on both issues, and of course we know too that among our listeners and viewers, we have some Creole viewers and listeners. I will challenge Mr. Guy Joseph to say some of what has been discussed in what we call our mother's tongue. Welcome, Mr. Joseph.
Thank you very much, Mr. Montoot. Good morning, viewers and listeners. You've heard two very powerful presentations at our press briefing this morning. But I want to begin my presentation today with a quote from the book Lapses and Infelicities by Rick Wynn, page 435. And I want you to pay some very careful attention to this short quote. It says, during his recalled talk appearance, Compton also referred to the tribalization of local politics. He said, you cannot expect the 17 persons you elect in parliament to have the answers to all the country's problems. You have to open the net. You have to bring in other people who are loyal and patriotic, people who want to see real development. He said the economy of St. Lucia under Kenny Anthony was in serious trouble. Crime was everywhere. And note, I am quoting from what Sir John said back then leading up to the 2006 elections. He went on to say, there was no respect for anything. people were afraid of the future. They longed for the confidence they had in the 80s and the 90s when the United Workers' Party held office and Compton was Prime Minister. St. Lucians had to be encouraged to come together again, to work in unity towards a common goal. Can you imagine this quote back in 2005, 2006 thereabout, being applicable today as if it had just been said? People are afraid in this country. And as we heard the two presenters, Mr. Rush Clark and Mr. Tommy Deska, and as Spider challenged me to do some patois, situation kouim la en Saint-Lucie Hodia, se yon ki ka fait tout moun paix. Même si ou ka weta dan kaye ek ou ni fence, ek ou ni camera, ek ou ni chien, ek même si ou ni gon ou même ki ni licence, moun still ka vive en paix en Saint-Lucie Hodia. Parce que situation kouim la pa ni pièce OSP pour pièson. Ek sa ki ka fait nous pli la peine about situation kouim la, c'est gouvernement silence. Nous pas katan yon mot parole from pièson en gouvernement silence situation kouim la. Gade pour semaine et demi qui passé, à peu près 12 moun a perdu la vie en Saint-Lucie. Et nous pokotan la ni combien ministre qui ni responsabilité. Premier ministre Saint-Lucie ni responsabilité pour security whole pays. Ça nous kouye national security. Nous ni un ministre qui a pointé pour empêcher crime. Non ministry c'est crime prevention. Et depuis a pointé ministre, nous ka wè pli crime ka fait passer avant. Question c'est les nous garder ça qui fait diwan semaine. A dans pièce pays, et ben n'importe l'autre pays en Caribbean côté là nan bon premier ministre, il te kay vini ek parler bay nation. Parce que pour ni yon maman qui 7 mois go boudé, jwen koy shoot ek li mort ek ish li même mort. Ek pa yon moun an didan an gouvernement Saint-Lucie qui a dit yon mot parole. So accordé pour gouvernement pièce kouim poko fait Saint-Lucie. Eh ben an yen poko fait qui vaut tant yo pour dire un teacher parole. Eh ben même si gouvernement a pas dit rien, nous savons c'est Labour Party a parler plus vite. Pour qui ça nous poko tant rien? Leader opposition a visité Saint Jude. Ek merci bon Dieu Renault vini ek fait nous savent c'est pas passe droit qui fait c'est pas trespass. Il vini ek il dit c'est li qui bail permission. Moi te a dit Renault ni plus pouvoir passer gouvernement. Hote quoi c'est blague. Il dit qu'a dépensé l'argent sous Saint-Jules. Li ek team li décider combien l'argent est puis pas important. N'importe quantité l'argent yo dépensé, ça pas important. C'est ça Renault dit. So Renault dit leader opposition na il a visité Saint-Jude et nous tan les bas a fait désordre à bord ça. 3 minutes après leader opposition na quitté Saint-Jude, il était ça en rapporté a sorti from Labour Party. Autant moun ha mort Saint-Lucie. Diwan semaine. ek nou poko tan yon mot parole from gouvernement, ek nou kon Saint-Lucien ka accepte dat nou ka paye se nom sa en haut $12,000 tous les mois pour gouverner pays ya. Ek yo pa nan yen pou di a sou sa ka fet la. Kon nou tan from Monsieur Descat. Gouvernement ja collecte plus taxe à sous nous en pays a passé pièce l'autre en history Saint-Lucie. Ça nous couille excise tax. Puis gas iban nous si pass through mechanism kita because manière te corporate tous les 21 jours 3 semaines. Depuis pour y a te changé à sous maquette la terre pour gaz. Puis gaz en Saint-Lucie te supposé trouver koya jet. Si ka monte, eh ben si ka descend. Depuis Philippe J. Pierre entré en gouvernement 4 l'année qui passé, pour y a monté pour $17 et 95 cents. Now pour moun qui pa have ça 95, c'est 95. 85. 80 is 80 et 15. So 1795 was the price of fuel. Imene descend pour $16 et 50 cents. Et à présent, il dit imene descend pour $16, $16. Puis nous still plus haut passer tous les autres pays à part OICS là. Nous t'en monsieur Descat expliqué assez bien anglais ban nous. Dat en chaque démarche gouvernement te sa point pour te sa bail Jean Saint-Lucie en soulagement à sous prix bail. Now yo di nou yo baissé prix VAT ek outan ki moun ki ka bénéfice. La ni moun en gouvernement qui ka bénéfice pli en baissé prix VAT la à sous building material passer pièce Saint-Lucien. Moi vle Saint-Lucien changer aussi by a company Trinidad. Yo tiye 2.5% health and security levy. Mais nous tout l'est moun en Saint-Lucie ka paye pour li. Ça c'est un gouvernement qui pour Saint-Lucie qui ka fait ces bail ça. So Lesser John eh ben en livre la mwen li la, lady you had tribalized politics Saint-Lucie. C'est les bas qui fait ça. Ou pas te katan si c'est indien, eh ben si c'est nègre, eh ben si c'est kouli kon yo vle di, eh ben si c'est betche, si c'est dogla, ou pas te katan rien about ça en politics. C'est les bas parti qui mène ça en politique Saint-Lucie. So yo ka essayer diviser moun en pays Saint-Lucie. So St. Lucians, we need to realize, as it has been said, the government we elect is the government that we get. And the Labour Party was elected by the people, and we need to correct this. Now, I will give you some stats again. In the last 3 years, we have had record-breaking years, and that is just in murders we are talking about, you know. We're not talking about burglaries and other forms of criminal activity, you know. We are just talking about murders. 77 reported homicides last year. I believe it was 80 plus. In 2021, we had 75, and remember, half of the year on the Labour, half on the UWP. In 2022, we had 72. And there was 75 in 2024. No, in 2023 there was 75, and 2024 there was 77. Plus moun ki mort à bas gouvernement flambeau pour l'année, c'est 60. 60. À bas les bas, il j'arrive 77. 77 moun a perdu la vie yo Fruquim en Saint-Lucie. C'est ça yo report. Now, the government introduced a health and security levy. Why was the health and security levy introduced according to the Prime Minister? It was to raise resources to improve healthcare and to fight crime. So if the measures are failing, Mr. Prime Minister, remove the levy that you have put on us, because you've not been able to fight crime and you have not been able to improve healthcare. Santé plus mauvais en bas les bas passé pièce temps en Saint-Lucie. Et crime plus mauvais en bas yo passé pièce l'autre temps en bas pièce gouvernement Saint-Lucie. Nous still ka payer 44 millions de dollars par l'année en health and security levy et nous pas pièce bénéfice. I want St. Lucians to also know that the government appointed a crime prevention minister. Yo ap mette quoi c'est police qui te pour empêcher crime fait en pays. Mais yo apprêté un ministre peut-être il était police en temps so peut-être c'est pour ça yo apprêté pour empêcher crime et nous ne plus crime. Nous ni un premier ministre qui a servi pays comme ministre pour security whole Saint-Lucie. Et il dit nous il partait police, c'est papa qui était police. So peut-être nous quand pour acheter pour papa pour mener nous en Tissoukou Saint-Lucie parce que trop moun ka mort. Si c'est pas ou qui te police, c'est papa ou qui te police. Eh ben bayan l'autre moun fait ministre national security. Because if the Prime Minister believes that a police officer is best placed to be the Minister of National Security, he should take a page from the Alan Chasney-led administration, where we appointed a former deputy commissioner in the person of Herman Gill Francis to be the Minister of National Security. And it is not by accident that the United Workers' Party performed much better in government than the Labour Party is doing, because we made deliberate decisions that would benefit the country. I want St. Lucians to remember, initially the SLP forgot to appoint a Minister of National Security. Can you imagine a Prime Minister sitting and putting a cabinet together? Now that should have told us everything we needed to know. That this government had no intention of fighting crime and stopping crime in this country. Because Premier Ministre la lay apprêté cabinet li y oublié pour apprêter un ministre pour national security. Et c'est pour raison ça la baten pièce l'autre monde pour bailler so il just point. Is that how we govern a country? Is that what we do as a people? And St. Lucians accept that. We accept that this is the best that we can do as a people? No. We can do much better than that, and we deserve much better than that. Not a government that forgets to appoint a minister of national security. Richard Frederick was accused of being a criminal by the same government that he currently serves with. And I want to show again a photo that I showed. And this time I want to ask the Labour Party to report. We have on here, could a murderer be the next Prime Minister? And there's a faded dark picture. I put on a magnifying glass. I could not figure out who it is. You can see I have my glasses. I still cannot figure out who it is. I challenge the Labour Party to tell the people of St. Lucia, because I know they know who they put on there. I also want to remind them, they have the picture of King bends over to Wycliffe. It's on their manifesto, you know. What you print on books, you can't go and erase, you know. Who threatened Lady Janice? Stevenson King's picture on one side, Lady Janice on another side. And they have a number of other ministers in there. The one that catches my attention the most is, could a murderer be the next Prime Minister of St. Lucia? And we all know who the Labour Party was accusing of murder in St. Lucia. Is it possible that this is the person's picture who is faded? Who they put it so that you cannot recognize? And Labour Party want us to sit and pretend that all is well in St. Lucia? And is that person in the present cabinet of the St. Lucia Labour Party? And is that person slated to be the next Prime Minister of St. Lucia? Because the question was asked by the Labour Party, not by the UWP. So I want St. Lucians to pay attention to what is happening to our beautiful country. Now, we are not persons who just come and talk about problems. Under the Labour Party government, they staffed the DPP Office of Resources. St. Lucians, let us speak to the facts. They care more about protecting the victory than about protecting the lives of St. Lucians. Ask yourself, does that government care about you and your family? Ma dekor question. Est action gouvernement sa akamoutou yoni pièce consideration pour ou ek famille? Now, crime prevention is very important. And you can go and look at crime prevention, page 29 of the old manifesto. But I don't want Philip J. Pierre to say that I have not been fair to him. So I brought in his manifesto, the 2021 manifesto. And under the page 26, crime prevention, I will highlight a couple of points and I will ask you, the people of St. Lucia, after 4 years, whether we have realized that. This is what he said. Introduce the use of drones by the Royal St. Lucia Police Force as a monitoring and detection device in crime fighting. In addition, we shall enact legislations to regularize the importation of drones. How many drones have you seen being used? Yon chien nou teni ki ken de nou pou fight crime. Yo tue. Ou kwa sa drone yo kay me an laser kan moun pa shoot le? St. Lucia, we must realize the trouble that we are in, you know. And it is not that just that the dog was killed, you know. It is what the dog was doing and why it was killed that should scare us as St. Lucians. And while I'm on that, I'm not an investigator, but I want to know why the guns detected by the K9 unit, why didn't they wait for the owner to come and claim his barrel or the box the guns was in? Why the detection was made in the morning and by the afternoon it was on television? You really think that all of us are fools in St. Lucia? Where is the Minister of Crime Prevention? Where is the Prime Minister and Minister of National Security? So if Customs did the detection, they would have had to call the police. When the police came in, all of us know a little. We watch enough crime fighting on television, on YouTube, globally. So we have a little knowledge. There are drugs that have left St. Lucia that Customs have detected already. They alert the members on the other side of the world where it is heading to, and they await the persons to come and pick it up so they can break the circle or the ring of crime. You telling me that a box or a barrel mysteriously appeared in Customs? It didn't come from a shipping agency. It wasn't on the manifest of the boat that it traveled on or the container it arrived in. Nobody paid for it to arrive in St. Lucia. Nobody went and delivered it to the shipping agency. Why is the government so silent on this matter? In fact, I have been informed, whether we are aware or not, that there may be a little army in training in St. Lucia and appears to be spearheaded by a high-ranking police officer. So, 3,000 rounds of ammunition, 17 high-powered firearms, and there's no word about it, no trace of where it came from, no indication where it was purchased, no means of tracing back the origin of where this was produced and where it could have been sold from. You telling me in this day of high-tech coordination between law enforcement agencies, so was that a setup? Was that a hoax to get rid of Tyson? What is it that went on? St. Lucians, we want to keep quiet about these things, but we cannot. I am sorry, the opposition is not going to sit by and allow these things to go unattended, and the government of St. Lucia remains silent. Customs have not made a statement to us on what happens. The police is not saying anything. So, are we without a government in this country? Est-ce nous pas un gouvernement en pays ça? Parce que si nous n'y un gouvernement, gouvernement supposé ban nous yon des réponses. Now turn ça. I will read the second point that they made. Allow the police commissioner to have greater operational independence over the management of the police force to increase its effectiveness in the prevention and fighting of crime, and to have them more accountable to the public when the circumstances demand it. So, Mr. Prime Minister, this is your campaign promise in your manifesto, and I believe that you need to tell the commissioner to report to the people of St. Lucia. That is what you promised us. I believe that the most recent situations demands an explanation from the commissioner of police. That's what you said. Ou di ou kay kite commissioner police fait travail li, I kay ni indépendance li. I pan pou mande gouvernement qui ça pour faire, eh ben qui l'est pour faire. Ek lè la ni bay dat public la supposé connaître about commissioner supposé di yo about li. So nous pas supposé savent qui manière Tyson moi. Nous pas supposé savent qui moun qui te responsable pour Tyson. Qui moun qui te ka bay manger, qui manière manger wat rive ko chien hier. C'est pas wat qui ka mene manger yo me là. C'est un moun qui pou me manger wat là. So, ou pas feel that Saint Lucinia une responsabilité pour dire nous ça qui fait. Et quand Tyson joine toutes ces guns ça, ces drugs là, c'est quand Tyson moi. Now, in his crime prevention, we don't just talk. I want you to go and compare the UWP's manifesto of 2021 and you will understand what you gave up for the non-performance of the Labour Party government. As what we said, we would re-establish relations between the government of St. Lucia and the United States on the issue of impacts. And you know, weeks before the election, we had the ambassador from Barbados here talking about the collaboration and the progress that we had made on the impacts. Have you heard the word from the Labour Party on impacts for their 4 years? What did the Prime Minister say? That was not his baby. It's not he that created impacts. But he was standing next to Kenny Anthony as deputy leader of the St. Lucia Labour Party when impacts was brought to St. Lucia. But all of a sudden is not his, is Alan Chasney's own. Here's what, resulting in the resumption of training and assistance suspended for nearly a decade to the Royal St. Lucia Police Force. Secured insurance policies for our police officers. For the first time in the history of the Royal St. Lucia Police Force, to the tune of 400,000 for death or loss of limb. That is what a UWP government did to empower and to encourage, to motivate our police officers to have a desire. Can you imagine a police officer would get hurt on the job and they have to go and pay their own medical bills? We changed that under a UWP. Install CCTV cameras from Castries to Grosile. Procure new equipment for the force, which include motor vehicles, motorcycles, 18 new engines for the police marine unit and over 800 radios. That is what we did, you know. I'm not talking about what we would do. Do you understand that? C'est ça. Le gouvernement, we had introduced a radar system at Mulashik between 2006 and 2011. It went down under the Labour Party in 2011 to 2016. Yo pas jamais wanhi. All the marine boats were down. We got 18 new engines for the marine unit for the boats to work and to be able to patrol the waters and control the number of illegal entries into this country. When there was a crime being committed, a police had to use his cell phone with his own credit to call for backup and support. Under the UWP government, we got 800 radios. Ask them what has happened to these radios since they came into office. We got the forensic lab fully operational. We had CCTV cameras installed, and we were in the process of installing hundreds more of CCTV cameras. All of this in an effort because the criminals are becoming sophisticated. I want to just touch two other quick points. Continue to improve and strengthen the system responsible for investigation, prosecution, and dispensation of criminal justice. Improve the intelligence and detection capabilities of the police and the border control unit. We were moving from the present structure to a border control unit. And the use, here's what we were doing. The search and seizure capabilities of law enforcement in the recovery of firearms, drug, cash, and that are associated to criminality. That is why a UWP government had the K9 unit. And we saw the effectiveness of the K9 unit. What has happened on the labor? First of all, the Minister of National Security disbanded the K9 unit. And when he reintroduced one, it's killed. Why? Because this government is a facilitator of crime. They don't fight crime. They facilitate crime. Here's what the UWP was doing. Ensure that criminals do not benefit from the crimes through robust asset recovery and proceedings of criminal initiatives. We were going to install an additional 700 CCTV cameras island-wide, covering at least 200 locations, procure safety and communications equipment, provide equipment for the collection and storage of computerized fingerprints, ballistic capabilities, and DNA testing. This is what a UWP government was doing. I want to ask St. Lucia, what has Labour Party done? Other than what, jet skis? Was it jet skis? The Prime Minister said he got for the Marine unit? Water skis, not even jet skis. Water skis, motorcycles and vehicles. Every government have provided motorcycles and vehicles for the police. Integrate the police crime unit with the forensic science lab. And here's the one that they are afraid of. Establish a permanent secretariat, National Anti-Money Laundering Oversight Committee, to maintain readiness in this area to strengthen St. Lucia's criminal justice system. Because some of the people accused of money laundering now sits in the cabinet of the St. Lucia Labour Party. So you think they will fight money laundering and criminal activity? So St. Lucia, you have to ask yourself whether you see any signs of the capability of this Labour administration to seriously address the cost of living and the crime situation in St. Lucia. You have a group of men and women, and you heard from two of them, very impressive, Mr. Roche-Clark and Mr. Tommy Descat. Very capable young men who have offered themselves for the service of this country. We have to right this wrong that is being done to St. Lucia by this present administration. And you St. Lucians have it under your control to right that wrong by electing the right government, the government of the United Workers' Party. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Guy Joseph, Deputy Political Leader of the United Workers' Party and endorsed candidate for the Castries Southeast constituency. Guy, je voulais remercier beaucoup parce que au banou un petit morceau en créole là avec ma salle c'est ça qui est responsable, mais je voulais remercier tout le monde qui a écouté parce que aujourd'hui moi observé c'est moun qui a écouté nous sur Facebook, nous tenons en haut 2000 moun qui a écouté nous pour matin. Ma sav si se Jean Créole la qui vini ordi sur Facebook là, mais ça c'était bien encouragement, ça c'est bon encouragement. Avec moi, je voulais remercier c'est l'autre présentateur, M. Tommy Descat avec Rush Clark. And at this juncture, before we close, I do not know if we have any questions for the presenters. If we do, please proceed to ask your questions at this time. Avec pendant nous gars là avec nous toujours nous peut demander questions au créole aussi parce que manière gars délivrer quoi là moi assuré qu'il ça répondre en créole si ça devient nécessaire.
Well, before I ask a question, I'd like to extend condolences from the management of staff of Fire FM to the family of Mr. Rush Clark on the passing of his cousin. And my question is for Mr. Descat. You made a presentation on VAT and the cost of living, and also on the cost of fuel. Now, we've heard a lot of, you said that the 2.5% reduction in VAT was the biggest deflationary policy in St. Lucia, but there are a lot of people who still don't understand how these things affect us. What is even more confusing to the general public is the fact that the Prime Minister decided to zero rate VAT exempt goods. Personally, I mean, if you're removing VAT on things that already don't have VAT, so who exactly does this benefit? Because some are saying that it can, the reduction can reach the shelves, or the government is saying the reduction can reach the shelves, but some are saying that this is simply a tax break for the businesses and not the consumer. Can you just shed some light on that policy for us, please?
Question directed to you.
Thank you for that question. I have to admit that any such policy that tries to reduce the final cost of goods by removing VAT, it must be done very clinically for it to have the intended impact. So, because the government, while it passes a piece of legislation to zero rate the items as opposed to exempting the items, and there are fundamental differences between a zero rated good and or service, and so exempt means that you cannot apply VAT throughout the value chain in terms of production, distribution, and so on, and so therefore the company cannot claim input VAT. With a zero-rated item, on the other hand, you don't apply the VAT at the various stages, but the input VAT, you can claim for it. So what it does, that policy takes into consideration the cash flow dynamics of the company as well, so they can claim for the input VAT. So that policy, and the government needs to come out and clarify it. I listened to the budget. Not the budget, the parliament seating, and I didn't get clear from them how is that intended to impact the final price on the shelves. What I would suggest is that the government needs to ensure that it monitors this price of items. So these 70 items, they need to sit with the Ministry of Commerce, sit with the retailers and say, what is the price of, let's say for hypothetically, a tin of tuna, or whatever that is, what is it pre the intervention and what it will be post the intervention. So people need to know that a can of tuna is it $12.30, and therefore they should now have that information spread throughout the country, right, to ensure that information is symmetry, that information people don't know. Because you have me now trying to go around which retailer is giving me the best price for. That's the burden to find out that is difficult for the person. So I would urge the government to do the right thing. For this policy to work, you must sit and identify these 70 items. What is the price? And have it widespread. So I know when I go to a show, I'm supposed to pay $12.50 for this. If not, it will not work. We've had the same with the construction stimulus package historically. When I worked in the Ministry of Finance, a previous permutation of the Labour Party administration did the same. And from our analysis, the government, they forego around, $100 and something million in VAT on construction items. But we did not see the commensurate economic activity on the ground. So the question is, should we have just handed the monies to persons instead, rather than there's the perception that the retailers and wholesalers took on some of these savings. Some waited out the period for the VAT and made lots of money from it. So I think that policy of removing VAT, especially on construction items, to stimulate the economic activity is a failed and inconceived policy. It doesn't reach the intended persons, but the government forgoes substantial revenues. So my view is this government needs to make sure, and I think the UW government will hold them to that account. And I've said that if they don't do it, we should take the initiative, look at the 70 items, do the legwork and say this is what you should be paying, and ensure that the final consumer benefits from this. Otherwise, it's just a bluff. It's very superficial if we don't go the full way to implement this policy. Thank you.
Mr. Joseph, you have spoken extensively. I listened to your presentation at the briefing. I listened to your presentation on crime at the town hall meeting. Well, it wasn't a town hall meeting; it was a Sunday Live, and I'm listening to you speak today on crime. You were a part of the St. Lucia, the UWP administration. During the during the tenure of Alan Chasney, a question came up in the Parliament, and it wasn't the first time that it was brought up. The Prime Minister of St. Lucia, current Prime Minister, said in a cabinet press briefing during, I think it was last week or week before, that during the COVID-19 pandemic, and I know you were instrumental in the government at that time, that the country had no savings, that the country had to borrow monies from NIC, and that the monies that you'll use to reimburse people were the people's savings and not the country's savings. That was his statement at the press briefing. At the parliamentary sitting, he said that the country had to borrow money from NIC, and then he quickly denied saying that. Can you just give the public some clarity? Because during the COVID-19 pandemic, I know that there were persons who were contributors to NIC who received compensation, and I also know that there were people who were not contributing to NIC who also received compensation, or at least I think that was the entire argument of the $500 and the 1.5. Can you provide some clarity on that for the St. Lucian public? That's my final question.
I have indicated that we have a prime minister who's very confused. He says one thing today and he denies ever saying it. So I'm not even going to attempt to clarify what Philip Japia says, because Philip Japia himself cannot even clarify what he says because he doesn't know. But I can tell you what transpired when we were in government. So there were two situations. There were the contributors to NIC who received a partial payment or a part payment of their salaries from NIC over a period of time. So this only applied to NIC contributors. It did not apply to the general public. In a separate arrangement, the government raised revenue through borrowings to compensate or to subsidize the informal sector of the economy who are not contributors to NIC. So it was not NIC money that was used to pay non-NIC contributors. It was separate revenue. So there's a clear distinction. If I wasn't a contributor to NIC, I could not get paid by NIC. And we had the vendors, we had the taxi drivers, we have a large sector of the informal economy that was affected by COVID because everyone was affected. So as a result, the government had to take that approach. Now, moi meute di sa patwa. Gouvernement te fait des différents transactions durant COVID. Moun ki te ka paye NIC paye yo un certain amount l'argent pour yon de mois. C'est moun nan ki pa te ka paye NIC. Moun ka an di kon se moun nan ki ni touye yo bo chime ka van, moun bo la place, farmer, différents moun ki pa te ka paye NIC. Gouvernement te prêté l'argent et c'est from l'argent ça, c'est moun nan te joine $500 par mois pour te aider yo. So c'est pas l'argent NIC gouvernement te point pour bailler ces moun nan qui pa te ka paye NIC. So le premier ministre lan di sa di a li yon ki sav sa y ka parle about. Ek mwen même pas même assuré y sav sa y ka parle about la.
Can you clarify whether or not the government actually borrowed money from NIC at all?
I am not sure where the government borrowed the money from. I cannot tell you that I can verify that it borrowed money from NIC. What I can tell you is when NIC looked at its books, that is why it was a very limited amount of payments that was made based on the situation. I can tell you we borrowed from World Bank, we borrowed from CDB, and the CDB money was to pay. Can you imagine? As members of CDB, CDB's policy is you cannot default on a payment as a borrowing member country. So what we had to do was to take a loan from CDB to pay the loan that we were owing them. I want St. Lucians to understand. Ek pitati important. Le COVID vini, peyi a te ka jwen $110 million par mois. 110 million. That went down to 55 million. Ça descend pour half quantité l'argent. Pour payer servant civil tout seul et pour run public service là. Ça te ka coûté nous à peu près 45 million dollars a month to run the public service. Un dette pour payer, un lantewe pour payer, un pays à pour run. So gouvernement ten pour prêter l'argent. Mais si vous allez garder record l'argent nous prêter, les bages a prêté plus l'argent passé nous hordia. Passé nous prêter les latin Covid. Et la pan pièce Covid. So moi vle Saint Lucien kopan. Si vous voulez savoir qui moun qui sa manager économie, gardez. Et premier ministre là toujours ka di bay. Et lay fini ka dou c'est pas ça il dit. Il dit fait moun moutwe côté dit te ka bay moun $1,500. Et se jou passe a yo ka bay moun $1,500 paske eleksyon ka vini. Vous comprenez? So, this is the reality of where we are. Our management of the economy, even during COVID, the record will show, was much better than even the management of the economy where the government is collecting record taxes. We fix more roads, we run a better healthcare system, we run better police force with security, and we maintain the cost of goods, and people got support. You remember how many boxes of food we distribute? You know how many people we had to feed during COVID? You know how much money was spent to run these centers, the COVID centers, to keep the people, the quarantine centers? All of that was done, and our debt borrowing was lower than the Labour Party has done in their 4 years in government. Thank you.
Okay, I think we have come to the end, but before we go off, I would just want to take this opportunity to express our sincere condolences to Tommy Descat and his family. We know that party stalwart Mr. John Descat of Swazel has passed. He's a staunch UWP supporter and supporter of Honorable Bradley Felix, and of course the uncle of Tommy Descat. It seems as if the death is hitting close to home, and so in addition to Rush, we also have Tommy, who's in mourning as well. So we want to remember them in our prayers, and we want to, let the families know that we are in solidarity with them. I want to inform you that coming Friday there will be a vigil to, in honor of those who have passed, and to, in observation of the high crime rate, the high murder rate that is taking place in this country. Please stay tuned as we'll provide you with more information on this vigil. We know the churches have called for prayers, and this is exactly what we are going to engage in. Friday, there will be the vigil, but if you listen to Meet the Opposition on Thursday, we'll provide you with more information. Of course, we expect you to join us next Sunday for another Sunday Live, which will be held in the constituency of Swazel. I want, before we end, to thank members of the media. I want to thank all of you who were listening. I want to say a special thank you to those of you in the diaspora. And today, I want to emphasize the thanks, because I think we had record numbers this morning in terms of our viewership. We surpassed 2,000 viewers this morning. I want to thank you for that, and I ask that you keep it up. Thank you very much, and have a good day.